The Vinece Firework. The sky was painted with a stunning array of colors and shapes, as the annual fireworks festival lit up the dark, starry night over Venice. It was a time of celebration, a time to remember the bravery and heroism of the Venetian soldiers, who fought and won the naval battle against the Ottoman Empire in the 16th century. As the dazzling display of fireworks drew to a close, a young man from another region stood in awe, watching the spectacle with wonder and amazement. It was his first time seeing such a breathtaking sight, and he was mesmerized. Marco had come to Venice for the festival, to escape the monotony of his mundane life, and to seek adventure and excitement, and it was here, amidst the revelry and cheer, that he met her. She was a young woman, her long, dark hair cascading down her shoulders in gentle waves. Her eyes were a deep, dark brown, and her face was etched with a sadness that he couldn't quite understand. He was immediately drawn to her, and he approached her with a friendly smile. "Beautiful fireworks, aren't they?" he said, trying to strike up a conversation. The woman looked at him with a hesitant expression, as if unsure whether to engage in conversation or not. "Yes, they are," she replied softly. He could sense her reluctance, but he was determined to get to know her better. He asked her about her life in Venice, and she told him that she had lived there her whole life. She spoke in a quiet, almost melancholy tone, and he could tell that she had experienced some kind of loss or tragedy in her life. He wanted to know more, but he didn't want to push too hard. Instead, he tried to keep the conversation light and easy, asking her about her favorite foods and music, and what she liked to do in her free time. As the night wore on, they found themselves wandering through the narrow, winding streets of Venice, lost in conversation and laughter. They talked about their hopes and dreams, their fears and regrets, and the world seemed to fade away around them. But as the night drew to a close, the woman suddenly became quiet, lost in thought. "I should go," she said softly. "It's getting late." He knew that he didn't want the night to end, but he respected her wishes. He walked her back to her home, watching as she disappeared into the darkness. He couldn't help but feel a sense of longing as he made his way back to his lodging, thinking about the mysterious woman he had just met. As he lay in bed that night, listening to the distant sounds of the festival still echoing through the streets, he couldn't help but wonder what her story was, and what secrets lay hidden beneath her sad, beautiful eyes. When he was about to go to sleep, he was suddenly startled by a deafening roar that shook the building. He looked outside and saw the sky lit up with a bright red glow. Confused and worried, he rushed out to the streets to investigate. To his horror, he discovered that Venice was under attack by foreign invaders. They were ruthless pirates, hired by the Ottoman Empire, who had come to pillage and plunder the city. Amidst the chaos and destruction, Marco couldn't help but think of the woman he had met at the fireworks festival the night before. He didn't even know her name, but he felt a strong urge to find her and ensure her safety. As he ran through the streets, he heard explosions coming from the direction of her house. Fear and worry gripped his heart, and he sprinted towards her home, hoping that he wasn't too late. Marco saw chaos erupting in all directions as he ran through the narrow streets of Venice. People were running in all directions, screaming in horror. Buildings were burning, and the smell of smoke and burning wood filled the air. Despite the danger, Marco continued to run toward the woman's house. His mind was gripped by the fear that she might be hurt, or even worse, dead. He didn't know why he was so attracted to her, but he knew he had to find her. As he turned the corner, he suddenly ran into a group of pirates who were heavily armed and had menacing eyes. Marco tried to avoid them and run the other way, but they were so fast that they surrounded him. "Who are you?" asked one of the pirates, pointing a knife at Marco's neck. "I'm just trying to find a friend," Marco stammered, his heart pounding with fear. The pirates obviously didn't believe what he said, and laughed at him. They were about to attack when suddenly a loud explosion shook the streets. The pirates momentarily lost their minds, and Marco took advantage of the opportunity to flee. As Marco ran, he knew that the cause of the explosion was cannons fired by Venetian soldiers. They were fighting the pirates, but it looked like a losing battle. When he arrived at the woman's house, he saw that it had been hit by a cannonball. The roofs had caught fire, and debris was scattered everywhere. Marco's heart sank, and he feared the worst. He searched through the rubble and debris, and called out to her, but there was no answer. He felt a tiny glimmer of hope when he heard a faint voice. He followed the sound and found the woman lying on the ground, injured and in pain. Marco ran to her side and helped her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his anxiety etched on his face. The woman nodded helplessly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for coming," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. Marco helped the woman to her feet and looked around to find a way to get them out of the danger zone. The male lead quickly took action, grabbing the frightened woman and leading her through the streets to the nearest shelter. They could hear the screams of others and the clash of swords in the distance. However, as they saw so many wounded, she suddenly panicked. She suddenly stopped and turned to face him. Her eyes were filled with sadness and grief. "I have to tell you something," she said in a hushed tone. Marco's heart sank, fearing the worst. "What is it?" he asked, bracing himself for bad news. "I had a husband," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was a soldier, and he was killed in a naval battle with the Ottoman Empire." Marco felt a pang of sympathy for her, knowing firsthand the pain of losing someone you love. Her heart raced as she tried to process the situation. She thought about her dead husband, and the fear that he must have felt during battle, but she couldn't dwell on it for long. The male lead's strong grip on her arm brought her back to the present. "Stay here and stay quiet," he whispered to her. "I'll be right back." He disappeared into the chaos, leaving the woman alone with her thoughts. She tried to focus on her breathing, but the sounds of battle were overwhelming. The crash of cannon fire and the screams of the wounded echoed through the walls. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, the male lead returned. He grabbed the woman and pulled her out of the shelter, guiding her through the streets to a small boat waiting at the dock. They rowed furiously, the male lead's muscles straining. The woman felt her heart rate slowly returning to normal. As they left the city behind, as they paddled away from danger, the woman felt a sense of gratitude towards the man who had saved her. She knew that her inner wounds still ran deep, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. "I never got your name," she said finally, breaking the silence. "It's Marco," he replied, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Thank you, Marco. I am Isabella," she whispered. He turned to her and smiled, his eyes shining with warmth. "You're welcome," he said. "I'm just glad I could help." And with that, they continued to row, leaving the chaos and destruction of the pirate attack behind them. As they sat on a tired, shaky boat, Marco realized that he had a deep bond with the woman. He didn't know where their relationship would lead, but he knew he would do anything to protect her from harm. Marco and Isabella arrived safely at a nearby port, where they stayed for a few days to rest and recover from their harrowing escape from Venice. During this time, they grew even closer, sharing stories of their past and getting to know each other better. Isabella couldn't help but feel grateful to Marco for all that he had done for her. She knew that she owed him her life, and she couldn't imagine what would have happened if she had been alone. But despite their connection, Isabella was still haunted by memories of her ex-husband. She wasn't sure if she was ready to move on, even though she knew that Marco was a good man who cared deeply for her. As they said their goodbyes, Isabella couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. She didn't know if she would ever see Marco again, but she wanted to hold on to the hope that they would meet again. "Will you come to the fireworks festival next year?" she asked, hoping that he would say yes. Marco smiled, feeling his heart skip a beat. "Of course," he replied. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." And so, they parted ways, with the promise of meeting again a year from then. As the year passed, Marco couldn't stop thinking about Isabella. He missed her more than he had anticipated, and couldn't wait to see her again. When the day finally arrived, he made his way to the fireworks festival, eagerly scanning the crowds for a glimpse of Isabella. And then, he saw her. She was more beautiful than ever, and his heart skipped a beat as he made his way towards her. As they met each other's gaze, they both felt a rush of emotions. Marco could see the sadness in Isabella's eyes, but he also saw something else, a glimmer of hope, perhaps. As the fireworks lit up the sky, Marco and Isabella smiled at each other, lost in their own thoughts. They didn't say anything, but they didn't need to. In that moment, they both knew that they had found something special, beyond the flickering flames that dance around them now.